What is it like being shot? What is it like being shot? What is it like being shot 15 times? And we're not talking about a 22 rimfire. We're talking about a 45 ACP. What is it like to be ambushed in a hallway by someone that you didn't know was there who tries to take your life? We're going to be throwing all these and many other important questions at Mr. Gabe Tauscher, who had that exact scenario happen. Mr. Gabe Tauscher is a Marine Corps veteran who turned into an executive protection specialist upon getting out of the Marine Corps, and between the two spent about 11 years in this role prior to the events that took place of May 29th, 2021. On about 7 a.m. of that day, Mr. Tauscher was escorting his girlfriend home after she'd worked the night shift back to the 10th floor of her apartment building. They had just stepped off the elevator when he was suddenly ambushed by her ex-boyfriend. The rest of the story, I'm going to be letting him tell. So guys, let's get into it. Mr. Gabe Tauscher, welcome to the program.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So you went through an experience that no one ever wants to go through. You were shot 15 times. 10 of those bullets entered and exited your body, leaving a total of 25 wounds. Is that right?
Correct, yeah.
Before we get into your story, I want to ask you a question up front. And for those of you who are wondering in the audience, yes, I did ask him ahead of time to make sure this would be okay. What is it like being shot?
It's kind of hard to really put into words. I remember it takes what feels like a few seconds before you actually realize that it's happening. Because I remember I was turning to face the guy and my internal monologue started screaming before I was able to register. It was because, bullets were entering and exiting and hitting me. And the first 13, it's the entire area around, say, the wound, like say this one here, this whole area, all the nerves are just screaming, and it's deafening. It's almost like one of the voices in your head is just kind of like trying to shout every other voice down. The last two, weirdly, because the gun had heated up, I had one that clipped my femoral in my right leg, and one in my stomach that felt more like burns. It's like really heavy burns. Yeah.
The earlier ones, and for those of you who don't know, what caliber? I mean, this wasn't a 22 rimfire, right?
No, it was he had a black semi-automatic 45 ACP.
So these were 45 ACP bullets. Do you know offhand if they're hollow point, if they're full metal jacket?
I asked a group of radiologists just out of curiosity, and they believed they were like Hornady critical defense or critical duty that might have been sitting in the magazine for a while. So it's some sort of hollow point, but that was most likely what it was.
So you said that the last couple felt like they were burning. Did those get stuck inside of you, or were those through and throughs?
Yeah, one in my leg, it clipped my femoral and actually exited through my right butt cheek, I believe. And the one that hit me in the stomach, I believe, got stuck.
But the earlier ones, I can't believe I'm going to say this, but the first 13 45 ACP bullets, you didn't describe them as burning at all. Did they feel like someone was punching you, stabbing you? It
was definitely a very, loud stabbing pain. Just from every nerve ending that had been touched was just, it was like being stabbed, like they had all been cut. Going down and through on both sides of the arm. Well, the arm was numb because one of them severed my median nerve. So I didn't really feel anything from most of my arm. But, it's what I remember more than the pain initially, just in the first, probably 2-3 seconds, was that it was hard to get a hold of my mind. And just from the screaming. I thought I was screaming out loud, but apparently I didn't make any noise. according to my girlfriend at the time, who was standing right next to me. And it was the second time in 2 years that I had made the "I'm going to die" scream. I knew before I was able to acknowledge that it was bullets, I already knew that it was bad.
So you turn, and we're going to get into the story in a moment here, but you turn. Do you even hear the gunshots?
The first one I didn't hear, but I saw the muzzle flash. 'Cause he came out of the stairwell in the hallway we were in, and I heard him. I heard footsteps. And so I was turning and looking over my shoulder. And so I saw the gun, and then I saw his eyes, and then I saw the flash. And then that was the screaming. And then it's like, oh, he's shooting me. And one of the voices in my head was like, this isn't a gun range, which I still think is funny, but
Marine humor.
yeah. It was, that's the best way I put it, is like my psyche kind of split. Because the internal monologue screaming never stopped, but there were multiple voices in my head simultaneously. And there was one that was thinking tactically, and there was one that was angry. And it was, because while I was spinning and he was shooting, there was a voice in my head that was like, well, if you try to draw and return fire now, he might actually start aiming. And in that's, the split seconds that this happened, I was able to assess that, he actually had a decent stance and a decent grip. He just wasn't letting the gun reset between trigger pulls. And so I was able to make a decision in that time that, if I survive this volley, then I'll fight back.
If you, and maybe there's no answer to this, but if you had to categorize what was the loudest voice in your mind? You said your psyche split between thinking tactically, anger, screaming. Lord knows how many others were going on. Which one do you think was the loudest?
I would say the scream. Like it was ever present. It didn't stop. It was, from beginning until he was gone, until he left the hallway. Or even a little bit after, because at one point I yelled at my girlfriend to call 911, or at least I thought I yelled. Apparently it was barely above a whisper, but that was that voice. It was definitely the one that was kind of in the forefront. But I would say the, tactical-minded voice was pretty up there, because I was able to, while knowing I was dying, was able to kind of keep my composure well enough to, not only return fire once he was dry, but to triage and render aid to my own wounds.
About what distance was he, would you estimate?
He was moving while shooting, so I would say he started probably about 10 to 12, and while emptying the magazine, I'd say he was between 5 and 7
feet.
Feet. Sorry.
So, almost entirely, not quite point blank, but near enough for our purposes.
It would have been hard to miss, I think. And he did still almost. He got me in the back of the left foot somehow.
And do you think that's just attributable to him just fanning the trigger as fast as he could?
Yeah. As I said, he, for the most part, looked pretty solid. He was just, it almost looked like he was kind of trying to force the gun down to fight against the recoil while mag dumping. I think that's how, he ended up, he sprayed me from, basically the shoulder all the way down to the foot in that. There's a good chunk that got me in the torso and the hip and the upper body, but there were a couple that it was just, wildly inaccurate. There was no real decent grouping to it.
So he shoots himself dry.
Mm-hmm.
You said you were hit 15 times. It's a semi-automatic 45 ACP. Good chance 15 rounds may have been all that he had, or at least near enough to that. So it sounds like he hit you, obviously at that distance, but just the same, he hit you. If not every time, then certainly the majority of the times. What do you do?
So I assessed, and I remember looking up because when it started, I still had my back to him, but because I was spinning when it started, I was on the ground kind of in a weird sitting position facing him. And I watched him drop the magazine, and he was very slowly loading another one. And so that was why I decided I needed to fire, because I figured, he was going to get me out of the way and then he was going to take her out. And I was left-handed at the time. I went to draw with my left arm, and that was when I realized it didn't work. So I tried to get my right in there, and the angle didn't work. So I actually ended up drawing upside down.
How were you carrying that day?
The 9 or 10-ish here.
Sure.
So it was a weird angle to try and feng shui your way in.
Right. So, I mean, that's the equivalent of a 4 o'clock inside the waistband carry for a right-handed person.
I don't know, about 230.
Just, you're right. Yeah. Just behind the waist, basically. Or were you carrying more?
A little bit closer to the front.
Got it.
Yeah. So about right here, maybe about a 10:30-ish.
What kind of firearm were you carrying?
An HK VP9. I actually just got it back from the police department about 3 weeks to a month ago.
Gotcha. How long ago did this happen?
This happened on May 29th of 2021.
So that's almost 3 years ago at this point.
Mm-hmm.
We're just coming up on 3 years. This is being recorded in early March of 2024. So what kind of, I know people are going to be asking this too, hollow points, 45 ACP, were you wearing 6 layers of winter jackets or something?
It was a cooler morning in Minneapolis, and this happened right downtown. So I was wearing a T-shirt and one of my favorite hoodies that I still want back, but it's covered in blood. But that was it. I wasn't wearing any sort of body armor, no other protection.
Did you find yourself focusing? You mentioned that you saw the muzzle flash. Were your eyes locked in on the firearm?
I don't know if I really locked into anything. I was attempting to turn to engage in some way, shape, or form, but it kind of, that muzzle flash and that pain, that screaming kind of threw me off for a little bit. And I just remember kind of spinning and falling and trying to keep my wits about me. And survive, I guess, in that, probably 10 seconds of that.
Is that about how long it was estimated it lasted?
That's about what I would assume, because it was, say a 15-ish round mag, and he was firing around a second or quicker. I'd say it's quicker than around a second. So 15 seconds tops.
So I want to get back to you now in a seated position on the ground, cross-drawing with your non-dominant right hand.
Mm-hmm.
What happens next?
So he was in the process of reloading. I remember there was enough gun smoke in the hallway that I couldn't really see above here clearly. It was
on him?
Yeah, I could not see his head or his face very clearly. So I did the best that I could, because just with the time limit I had, to draw upside down and kind of aim like this the best I could, and I pulled the trigger with my pinky.
So the gun's upside down and you're firing with your non-dominant pinky.
Correct.
Not something you practiced?
No, because who does that?
I don't think I've seen anyone do that. Maybe in some John Wick movie, but I mean, if that happened, I cannot recall it. What happened? Did you hit him?
I think I saw it as a skit in Brooklyn when I 9 once.
Okay.
Other than that, yeah. I did, yeah. Because, so I was looking down for the last 2. And the one that hit my right leg and the one that hit me in the stomach. And the one that hit me in the stomach, I kind of did a little bit of a bob, my body involuntarily reflexed and moved. And when I pulled the trigger, I saw him do something similar, almost kind of, which told me I got him somewhere in the, the left lung, it's the upper stomach, left lung area.
Was that subsequently confirmed?
Talked to a couple people at MPD that have told me that what the media said about, him ending his own life, the blood spatter in the car didn't match that, and that I did in fact hit him. So they didn't say that, well, you got him, but they didn't say that I didn't.
And that's something that a lot of people don't understand unless they've been in this situation. You having survived one of these situations, and myself and my firm representing 5 to 15 people at any one point in time on defensive gun use cases, is people just think that the cops are going to give you all the information right away. Was that your experience?
No, it was I was in a basically medicated coma for about a month afterwards, and then I had to relearn how to talk after that. It was a very long teeth pulling exercise, and trying to find out what the PD had, what they knew and what they didn't. And it was very hard to get a hold of police reports and any contact info for any of the detectives on the case or any of the responding officers on scene.
How do you feel like they treated you? And I'm not asking you to single out names or anything like that, but do you feel like they treated you like the victim that you were, or was it, this is another case, you got to go call this number for that information?
Officer Tim Davis deserves the medal he got for saving my life. He's another Marine. I've actually went bar hopping with him last winter. And he took the tourniquet out of his own IFAC and the chest seal out of his own IFAC to patch me up and stabilize me so that I could make it to Hennepin County Medical Center.
Thanks for making it through this video so far with us. I hope you're getting something interesting out of this. A little bit darker than many of our normal videos, but I think there's a lot of very important information for folks to hear. If you want other folks to be able to see that information and to be able to get that information, then help both us as well as the channel out by hitting that like button. You're basically telling the YouTube algorithm this is important, other people need to see it. And of course, if you want to join the discussion down below, drop a comment. Both myself and I suspect Gabe as well will be checking it out and taking a look to see what people had to say. And lastly, if you just caught us browsing through, we appreciate you joining us. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button if you want to consider viewing any of our future videos. Now back to the program. This seems like a good time to go into, at least a good time as any, where were you hit? And then from there, I want to go into, you mentioned that you started to render self-aid, but let's start with where were you hit?
So I think there's a good amount in the left arm. There's, one right here on the wrist, and the exit right here.
And you mentioned that bullet was still hanging out.
Yeah. It kind of an exit wound, but the bullet was kind of hanging out of it. Then there's another entry wound right here in the left forearm. There's 2 exit wounds on the kind of the ulna here. I've had to get this a bone thrown in here because this was basically vaporized. This is an entry wound at the edge of this scar going towards my elbow. They had to reattach my median nerve because I have entry and exit here on my tricep.
Oh, I can see.
And then a couple in my armpit up here that I think one of these is one of the ones that ended up in my left lung. Because I have a couple in this area. I've got 3 in the left hip with a couple entry wounds on the inside of my left leg. Exit wounds, my bad. And then an entry wound in the left heel and an exit wound in between 2 of my toes. And I also have, there's an entry wound right next to my spine on the back. I believe that was the first one he got me with. That the bullet is still right here. It's become a party trick. Like, hey, touch my bullet.
Do you set off metal detectors?
I don't. And that's, I've asked way too many questions to radiologists. And I found out that's because apparently copper and lead are non-ferrous metals. And so is titanium. So that's why my surgical plates and the bullets don't set anything off. But TS-Aid still does know with the thing that scans your insides, and they're a lot nicer to me leaving that machine than they am when I enter if I ever fly.
That's good. That was my next question: was how are your friends at TSA treating you these days? You mentioned rendering self-aid. This is another thing that people, in my experience, they don't pay much attention to because we have this bias in America where we tend to be optimists about things, unlike Europe, where they just kind of, you watch a European war movie, it's like, well, everyone's going to die by the end of this, right? We have this, thanks to Hollywood or I don't know what, just our general way of looking about the world, of being optimists and thinking I'm not going to get hit. I'm going to win this fight and I'm going to be good. And I don't need to really be thinking about non-dominant cross draws or firing with a pinky upside down through smoke. That's about plan Z at that point. And people also don't really think about rendering self-care. Let me start with this question. Was your ability to proficiently apply emergency first aid to yourself, did that save your life? Is that why we're able to talk right now?
I would say that it's definitely one of the major contributing factors, yeah. At this point, I was lying down, and I remember I looked down at my right leg, and I saw that my jeans had bled through, and it looked like I had a femoral bleed. But due to blood loss, I, for some reason, didn't think I could reach my right hip, right leg. So I went for the next most serious, which was, my hoodie that was blue was now soaked red from this, my torso on down my arm. So I figured I had something brachial at some point here. So I did what I could to shove my thumb into the brachial artery up into my armpit and clamp my hand around the upper part of my arm, elevate the arm to slow and stem the bleeding. And then from there, I also rolled myself onto my left side because the pain I could feel here, I couldn't really know, but I felt like I had a punctured lung. And so if this one was filling up, I could still breathe out of my good lung. Got it.
So put your good lung up so you can still keep getting oxygen through it. Were you thinking all that through as this was the tactical voice taking over, I assume?
Yes.
Had you been trained on maybe not exactly those things, but basically those sorts of considerations?
I hadn't been trained on, the prospect of doing it to myself, but I feel like the Combat Lifesaver CLS course that I took when I was overseas was, invaluable at that moment. And I've reached out to my platoon corpsman, just kind of thanking him for teaching me giving me those tools. Zach Hansen and Mike Devers had a hand in saving my life.
You mentioned the officer showing up.
Mm-hmm.
Before he got there, was there any other self-aid you were able to give?
So in between me rendering aid to myself and the shooting itself, I actually tried to stand up and get down to the lobby of the building because it was connected to the Minneapolis Skyway. And I knew that there was a security kiosk, and I knew they had first aid kits, and I assumed they had something for trauma. And I figured if I could get down there, and that I would have a better chance of surviving. So me kind of clamping my own artery and rendering aid to myself was me trying to get down there is going to cause more harm than good. And it was last resort of survival.
Before the officer showed up, you mentioned that your then girlfriend was there. Was she still there while you were busy applying first aid?
She was there throughout the whole thing, screaming, fetal position. She kind of froze up. She knew that it was her ex, because I remember at one point that she yelled his name and yelled for him to stop. And she did end up calling 911, and the dispatcher was trying to talk her through helping with first aid by the time that first responders arrived. One of the neighbors actually helped as well. He brought out towels and some of the stuff from his first aid kit, as well as being the one that let first responders into the building. I remember she didn't have the training, and I remember there were things I would have corrected her on had I, had the energy to speak and say things. But in some ways there was more harm than good. Like, she kept rolling me back onto my back because she didn't know any better.
And then the officer showed up, and then you mentioned that he saved your life, applying a tourniquet. Talk us through it.
What I remember, the police were, psyching themselves up and yelling that I didn't hear them yell police correctly. But they yelled over the elevator door opening, and we were hearing the yelling over the door opening. And I remember The first one came out of the elevator bay and kind of turned left and held security on that part of the hallway and just kind of held that position. And the other one came flying around the corner to clear past me. I remember, like, even with, knowing that I maybe had a minute left to live, I was kind of giving them props in their tactics. And while clearing past me, he yelled, "Whose gun is that?" And she's like, "It's his." And so he cleared down the hallway, and then he came back. And I didn't actually hear him come back, but I'm holding my arm up and, still clamping the brachial artery. And he just, comes back down, and there's a tourniquet. He pulls the tourniquet on and does that. And there's more, at that point, more... I don't know if they were police medics or what kind of trauma team they had came into the hallway. Because, my memory's coming in and out at this point, so I don't actually remember the chest seal, and I don't remember the tourniquet being put on my right leg, but the next thing I remember clearly is like looking down, and there's someone different who wasn't the police officer kind of kneeling and looking very earnestly into my eyes as if trying to check to see if I'm still there, I guess.
Anything else you remember from that day? Did they try to ask you questions or? According
to one of the officers, I actually gave a description and of the shooter and a little bit of a statement while they were trying to patch me up. I don't remember this. The next thing I remember, they got a stretcher. The EMTs, the police medics, whoever it was, got a stretcher. They put me on it. And I remember the elevators in that building were kind of small, so they actually ended up tilting me vertically. So my head was on the ground when we rode 10 stories down. And I remember, Officer Davis yelling, "You got this, Marine," as the paramedics took me away and the door closed. And there was a crowd outside of the building as they put me in the ambulance, which had pulled up onto the sidewalk. I tried to pull the blanket of the covering they had on me off at that point. Like, I don't know what I was doing, but I wanted them to see me bleeding or something. And they put me in the ambulance, and they hooked me up with an IV on I believe my left immediately. I don't remember. But there was one who was kind of working over my left shoulder, and the other one went to close the doors. And I remember trying to grab the one as he was walking by me, and the last thing I remember saying, and the last thing I remember clearly, was saying, "Give me some fucking painkillers." And that's the last thing I remember for the next, month.
You and I talked about this before we turned on the cameras, but I think it's something else that people need to hear about because, again, there's so much focus on the incident. There's so much optimism for the fact that A, you're going to win, and B, you're going to get out of this unscathed. You shared with me some of the details about the hell of recovering from something like this. Briefly, just what's it like?
The delirium, the dreams, and the hallucinations from the painkiller, the fentanyl, the morphine, everything they had me on. I was in an alternate reality for the next, I'd say, month or so. Like, I remember the month of June 2021 a lot differently than I feel like everyone else does. A lot of it was grounded in reality, and real people that would come visit me in the hospital would make it into these dreams and hallucinations, but something completely different would be going on in my mind. Like, the nurses were plotting against me, and I thought my doctor was trying to kill me, and because they had to trach me because I apparently tried to escape and was ripping out my breathing tube, so I ended up having to trach because that's the only solution they could, that I made them resort to.
For those of you who don't know, in other words, they cut a hole into your throat to gain airway.
When the hallucinogenic painkillers were kind of weaned off, and I returned to the reality that everyone else was in, it was like being a baby in a 29-year-old's body, because I could still, or the other way around. I had my brain, but my left arm wasn't responding still. I couldn't get up, I couldn't walk, and the month on bed rest, my body had eaten my muscles to survive, so I couldn't sit up. The only thing that really worked when I was trying to get it to was my right arm, because that was the only part of me that hadn't been impacted in some way. And because of the trach, I couldn't talk. So just communicating and trying to do really anything was horrible for that next few weeks. Especially because, my memory is still coming back. I was still trying to differentiate what was real and what wasn't from the last month or so. And it took a few days for me to remember that I had been in a gunfight and, know that I was in Minneapolis, because there were some dreams and hallucinations where I had time traveled. I had traveled around the country, and I wasn't sure, what year it was or what city I was in, or, why I was there at first. And that was not being able to ask and get that clarified was its own special kind of hell. And then that's not even getting into, the surgeries both before I could remember and, that I had to be anxious about moving forward, in that second month. Because I spent 85 days in the hospital after this. And the third month of it was just rehabilitation, trying to get any sort of motion or movement out of my left hand and my left elbow, and trying to be able to, first working from laying down to sitting, and then from sitting to standing, and then standing to walking. And having to learn how to walk again at 29 years old was one of the hardest things I think I ever had to do.
How much utility have you regained? Or are you back to 100%? Are you at 80%?
I'd say 80. I don't want to go higher. I could be generous and say 85, but I've got a good amount of range of motion back in my left hand, but I still can't pull a trigger lefty, so I'm a right-handed shooter now. I'm still working on strengthening the hand and the wrist in order to be able to lift heavier things with my left arm. But I do still have foot drop on my right foot that I actually wear a brace for. But I have a Siberian Husky that I walk, when I have him at my apartment, that I walk, 3 to, sometimes up to 5 miles a day. And I can run short distances. I'm up to about a half to 2/3 of a mile now.
That's better than most Americans.
Fair enough. The issue there really is more my heart than it is my legs, because it's still kind of working its way back down. When you have 25 open wounds, your heart is working overtime to try and close those all up simultaneously. So my resting heart rate in the hospital was like 127. I think I take a beta blocker daily to try and keep it down. It's within the healthier range, but it's still closer to 90 now. So if I try to run too far, my heart will, freak out and get mad at me.
What advice would you have for people who conceal carry or thinking about concealed carrying?
The best carry gun is the one you train with, the one you know. The VP9 I used that day, and that since I got it back from evidence, I carry again, was the one I had been carrying that for work for, the last couple of years before that. That's the one, I practiced mag drills. I practiced, I would take to the range, regularly just to keep up on it. And it's, whether you're talking training or utilities or what have you, it's better to have something and not need it than the other way around. Like I mentioned earlier, I did not have my IFAC, my tourniquet, the morning of the shooting because I left it in my car. And that's, I think, although I did make it out of that, I feel like it would have been dumb of me to die because I left my first aid stuff, 20 feet away.
Always be carrying and train with what you carry.
Mm-hmm. I'm also a proponent of keeping one in the chamber, because, I mean, had I not been, how would I have been able to rack one? You never know if you're going to be in a situation where you have to draw, where you're fighting somebody off, or, you can't use the non-dominant hand.
Is where you and how you carry on your body, has that changed now that you're maybe thinking about cross-draw carries?
It would be if my left hand was a little bit more functional, as I'm not to the point yet where I can really fire with my offhand. It's just, where it's easy and accessible for my right. But, if I get to the point where I'm ambidextrous enough as a shooter, that will be a consideration.
Gabe, what are you up to these days? How can people find you? How can people support you?
So my handle on Instagram is immortalnomad0341. Still using my old MLS. I'm back in the field working executive protection and logistics for Irregular Solutions. If you need one of the best in the state of Wisconsin, look into them. If you're looking for a contractor company that knows what drip is, look into Odin's Group, security contractors, the Tiger Stripe.
It's back, baby.
Yeah, I'm also turning the events the day of the shooting into a book. I don't have a name for it yet, but it's something to look out for.
Sounds good. And for those of you who are, of course, interested in that, we'll make sure that there's some links down in the description box below. Gabe, thanks for coming in.
Thanks for having me.
So we'd like to thank once more Mr. Gabe Tausch for coming in. You can find all of his good contact information as well as business information in the description box below. Of course, I look forward to joining you in the comment field. This one, as always, I'm sure will prove to be interesting. I want to close with today's quote of the day. This one comes from psychologist Carl Jung. I am not what happened to me. I am what I choose to become. I hope you're choosing to become something good, stronger, and better. I'll see you in the next one. Thanks for sticking around to the end of the video. If you enjoyed this one, please feel free to check out some of our other great content, and we'll see you in the next one.